Hi, today we'll be going over Brown versus Board of Education and answering 4 important questions. First, I'll briefly summarize the facts, the issues presented to the court, and the ultimate decision in the case of Brown versus Board of Education. Second, we'll be diving into the central question that the Brown court indicates must be answered. Third, we will look at the effects of segregation on public education at the time of the Brown ruling. And finally, we'll explore the harm that would result if an employer were allowed to require its employees to work in facilities separated by race. Let's start with question number 1. The Brown v. Board of Education case originated in 1951 when Oliver Brown, an assistant pastor and World War II veteran, along with other African American parents in Topeka, Kansas, filed a class action lawsuit against the Topeka Board of Education. The lawsuit challenged the constitutionality of segregation in public schools, which had been upheld by the separate but equal doctrine from Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. Oliver Brown's daughter, Linda, was one of the children denied admission to the nearby white school. She had to travel a long distance to attend a black school. This experience was common for many African American children in Topeka and across the United States who faced segregated schools often farther from their homes. The case was first heard in the United States District Court for the District of Kansas, which ruled in favor of the Board of Education. However, the plaintiffs appealed, and the case reached the United States Supreme Court, which combined it with 4 other similar cases from South Carolina, Virginia, and Delaware. The central issue was whether segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and whether the separate but equal doctrine was still valid. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren's decision stated that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, overturning Plessy v. Ferguson and recognizing that segregation deprived African American children of equal educational opportunities. Now, let's move on to question 2. The central question the court had to address was whether segregation, even if the facilities were equal, deprived African American children of equal educational opportunities. The court placed heavy emphasis on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which prohibited states from discriminating based on race. The court's interpretation marked a significant shift, acknowledging that segregation itself was inherently unequal, no matter the quality of facilities. The court also considered social science evidence, including psychologist Kenneth Clark's research showing how segregation harmed African American children's psychological development, creating feelings of inferiority. The court used this evidence to support its decision that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause by denying the African American children equal educational opportunities. Next, we will answer the third question, which was, what were the effects of segregation on the public education at the time of the Brown ruling? At the time of the Brown ruling, segregation had serious negative effects on public education for African American students. Schools for African American children were typically underfunded, overcrowded, and lacked essential resources. White schools, by contrast, were both better funded, had more qualified teachers, and offered more educational programs. In places like Harlem, many African American schools were in poor conditions, and new schools had not been built for decades. The lack of quality educational resources limited African American students' opportunities and perpetuated cycles of poverty. Additionally, the emotional and psychological effects of segregation harmed students' self-esteem and hindered academic achievement. Overall, segregation resulted in significant educational inequality that harmed African American children's futures. And finally, we will answer the last question, which was, what harm do you believe would result if an employer were allowed to require its employees to work in facilities that were separated by the employer's race? If an employer were allowed to require segregated facilities for its employees, the harm would mirror the effects of segregation in education. There would be unequal working conditions, fewer opportunities for advancement, and pay disparities between segregated groups. Segregating employees would also reinforce racial stereotypes and perpetuate discriminatory attitudes, leading to a toxic and hostile work environment. Employees in segregated facilities would experience feelings of inferiority, lowering their self-worth and job satisfaction. It would also limit opportunities for collaboration and innovation, as employees from different backgrounds would be kept apart. Allowing segregated workplace would create lasting harm, reinforcing systemic racial inequalities and limiting professional growth for employees. In conclusion, the Brown v. Board of Education decision was a landmark ruling that overturned the separate but equal doctrine and paved the way for desegregation. It highlighted that segregation violated the fundamental principle of equality enshrined in the 14th Amendment, and it reinforced the need for equal opportunities for all Americans, regardless of race.